All right, I hope everybody is well. Again, this is Mark Hauser with the Ecology Outreach Manager for Friends of the Chicago River. And this is Chicago River Turbulent History and Recent Renewal, Part 6, Water Quality Issues, or I should have actually named it Modern Water Quality Issues. There are a lot of things that we've talked about over the last couple weeks that are historical, that I wouldn't consider necessarily a problem anymore. We talked about the reversal of the river. I guess you could deem the re-reversal of the river an issue or something that we could talk about, but we've kind of already covered some of those. So I want to try to limit our discussion today and the presentation to open questions that still haven't been solved, some things that we're still tackling today. And I do apologize if some of these are repeats, but some of the things that we talked about in the history obviously are still modern water quality issues, so we're going to talk about those. Again, there are YouTube links to all the past presentations. I can share those if you'd like. Really, all you have to do is get on YouTube and search for Friends of the Chicago River or Chicago River Talks, and they pop right up. They're also available on Friends of the Chicago River's website under the About Us Resources section, if you're looking for those. All right, so I mentioned that this is part 6 of a series. We started with just who is Friends of the Chicago River as an organization, some general river geography and ecology, and then just finished up the last of the 3 history segments. We looked at more 18th century history into 19th century, mid 19th century to the early 20th century, and then late 19th century into the almost the modern age in infrastructure improvements. So all of those are done. What I want to focus on today again are modern water quality issues. Let's see. Everybody. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, I want to cover a lot of ground, and I do hope to get through this in 45 minutes or so and leave time for some questions and answers at the end. But I want to talk about some of the water quality milestones just to give us a timeline of what has been done, talk about bacteria in the Chicago River and in effluent disinfection, combined sewer overflows, what are they, how do they affect the river, what have we done to solve them through the tunnel and reservoir plan, reservoir construction, and Friends Initiative, the Overflow Action Days. I want to talk about point source pollution, the Clean Water Act, and non-point source pollution that we still deal with today. There's several aspects to that. There's nutrient pollution, there's trash, plastic, medications, salt, household hazardous waste. And then I kind of want to finish with just a little bit on climate change. I have a whole hour-long presentation on climate change in the Chicago River that I'm going to be doing in July or August for Chicago River Day. But I'll cover a few slides just to kind of sum up the issue. All right. So if everybody's ready, let's get into it. Chicago River quality, I think it's fair to say that the Chicago River has a murky or a bad reputation in terms of water quality. I talk to kids all the time in presentations on field trips that are shocked that you can even touch the water, but you can. The history of the water quality of the Chicago River, it was fairly good until the mid 19th century when the Chicago area started ballooning in population. We get more and more people living in the city. That's when water quality starts to go down. But it's been improving steadily since about the mid 20th century, the environmental movement of the 60s, the Clean Water Act, things like that. So one of the big first milestones in terms of water quality and improving water quality was the Clean Water Act of 1972. And a lot of these are going to be covered in later slides, so I'm not going to kind of expound on them right now. In 1981, TARP went online. That's the Tunnel and Reservoir Plan for the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. It actually went online in 81. In 86, the EPA assigned secondary use designations for the river, meaning that it finally had a baseline minimum requirement for water quality. In the 2000s, Friends of the Chicago River and many other organizations, including the EPA, were in front of the Illinois Pollution Control Board doing use attainability analysis of the Chicago River. And that led to, in 2011, US EPA improvements for the water quality standards were submitted and then adopted in 2015. And this basically changed the river from being seen, this is a gross terminology, but generally as an open sewer. It actually changed it to being recreational use in some areas and recreational use with limited water contact in others. So it upped the water quality standards for use along the Chicago River. And pursuant to that, in 2015, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District actually started disinfection technology at some of the water treatment plants. And again, we're going to talk about a lot of these. This is like an outline for the whole thing. So bacteria in the Chicago River. If you look back, some of the first water treatment plants along the Chicago River were in the 30s, 1930, 1939. The first two were combined to create the Stickney Water Treatment Plant, Water Reclamation Plant, and that's still today the largest in the world. And they go through a primary and secondary treatment of water. And then during that process, they actually introduce bacteria to consume the sewage that is in the water that they obtain. The effluent that goes out from 1930 until the 2000s, 2015, it had bacteria in it. The bacteria was not removed like it had been in other cities. And this is a problem when you have 7 water reclamation plants and you're dealing with 1.3, 1.4 billion gallons of water a day. I said that we were doing this when other cities were not. If you look at the city of Chicago compared to other comparable cities in the United States, you can see along the Calumet and the North Shore, the first 2 graphs, we have fecal coliform levels in the 4 and even 5-digit range. Compare that with Minneapolis and Elgin and Philadelphia or Gary, Indiana, or any city. We have a lot more bacteria in the Chicago River up until 2015. And this is CFUs per 100 milliliters, so fecal coliform bacteria colonies per 100 milliliters of water. And where is the bacteria in the Chicago River? Well, there's a map of the Chicago River in the city, and here is the O'Brien or the Northside Treatment Plant is the red dot. And you can see upstream of the plant at Central, Dempster, and Oakton, fecal coliform levels are pretty low. But downstream in the effluent, when the water treatment plant is actually putting water back out into the river, fecal coliform levels are pretty high. And being a living organism, bacteria actually does decay over time. And so it takes anywhere from 3 to 7 days for the bacteria to die. And so the bacteria levels will spike right downstream of the treatment plant and then kind of taper off as you go downstream. And downstream from the Northside Treatment Plant, although it looks like it flows out into the lake, we talked about with the reversal of the river, downstream is actually to the south towards downtown. And that's Touhy, Foster, Wilson, Diversey, and Grand. And you can see the bacteria levels do spike in the 5-digit range. If we look specifically at the Northside Treatment Plant, this is the O'Brien Treatment Plant at Howard in Skokie on the border of Lincolnwood, just on the north edge of the city. Again, I think I have a map. There we go. It's the red dot up on the north side. Stickney is the green dot out on the west side. And the Calumet plant is down south. Upstream of each of these water reclamation plants, bacteria levels are pretty low. Downstream, they're fairly high. If you're going to touch or interact with the water, here's your safe swimming level at 200 colonies per 100 milliliters. Here's your safe boating level at about 1,000 colonies per 100 milliliters. So you can see for human contact, upstream would be fairly safe. Downstream would not be. And this is historic. This is actually data from 2004. things have changed, which is really, really good. In 2015, after the updated water quality standards, there has been disinfection technology put in at the Northside plant in Calumet, and you can see their levels are much lower. That's actually not the actual level. I just wanted to get rid of the bar graph so it didn't distract everybody. But the Stickney water treatment plant still has no timetable for disinfection. It is not disinfected. And I have an idea that that's because it's so big. When it's so large, it's hard to put in that kind of technology. Still admitting people to the meeting. There we go. So I'm not blaming the MWRD at all. It's, it does take time to analyze how to do something like that and figure out what kind of technology you want to put in. Here's probably a good place to mention that the Northside or O'Brien treatment plant actually does ultraviolet filtration, whereas the Calumet plant does chlorination, dechlorination of the water. And that's because they deal with so little water compared to the other systems. So talking about disinfection, 2015, what does that look like? Well, we still have an intake of sewage water to the water treatment plant. They still do primary and secondary treatment. Bacteria is still introduced, but at the very end, before the water is re-released into the river, that effluent, just to take the example from the Northside plant, is run under an ultraviolet radiation source. In a gross kind of way, it's like a big, huge tanning bed for the water. And they zap it with so much ultraviolet radiation that it kills the bacteria before that goes back out into the river. And that cleans it. At least it takes care of the bacteria that was there and used to disinfect the sewage and get rid of that. So that's where we are today. And there is one of the ultraviolet beds to cleanse and disinfect the water before it goes back out. Turning our sites to what a combined sewer overflow is, that's another issue that just with the sheer amount of water, sometimes the water treatment plants cannot handle all of the water in the system. And because the Chicago River has such a kind of an antiquated system from the 19th century, we have one combined sewer underneath the city of Chicago. And if you have a separated sewer, which would be some of your outer suburbs, say north of Dempster or Gulf Street, or you go out far enough west, if you have a modern sewage system, you have a separated sewer, and that actually keeps storm water, which is water from rain, from your roof and from the yard, separate from what you flush down the toilet. So you have storm water, you also have sewage. And the sewage goes for treatment, and the storm water, which is largely just water, fairly clean, it goes right to an outflow. In a combined sewer, which is what Chicago has, both of those go to the same pipe and have to go to treatment because it has sewage in it. And this is a problem because if there's too much rain, it can inundate the system and actually make it overflow. And that is the combined sewer overflow idea. There's a map of the Chicago area waterways. Anything in red is in the combined sewer overflow area and could potentially have a CSO event when we have a lot of influx of rainwater, like we did last week. Right now, there are all kinds of stories about flooding in the Chicago area, Willis Tower. I even saw a story about the Bridgeport Arts Center is flooding, and they have a lot of important artifacts. When you get water like that coming in from the river, it's going to have sewage in it to some extent. And so we have to be very careful about these kinds of things. There's a cartoon I share with kids just to kind of depict what combined sewer overflow is and how the tunnel and reservoir plan was planned and built to kind of take care of it. So if we have the city of Chicago here, just to orient you, we have some residential houses out on the left side downtown. We have the river, and there's a water reclamation plant as we go left to right. And there are pipes built underneath the city. And in this case, being Chicago, this would be a combined sewer system. So let's see what happens when somebody flushes the toilet. When they flush the toilet, The sewage goes in a pipe, goes to the water reclamation plant, and it becomes treated and goes to the river. Now, because we have a combined sewer system, when it rains, that storm water is going to join with it and all go to the water reclamation plant. But however, when it doesn't all fit in the pipe, it has to go somewhere. And it either is going to go into your basement or into the river. And so we have outflows, overflows that take it to the river. And this is a combined sewer overflow. Now, the tunnel and reservoir plan, which has been built since 1975 by the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, actually is designed to take that overflow and back it up and put it into underground pipes. There are 109 miles of pipes underneath Chicago, and we have many, many storage reservoirs. I believe it's up to, we have 2 or 3 right now. And that stores the water until the rain goes away. And then they can pump the sewage water up to be treated at the water reclamation plant on their own timetable so that they actually can do it. Here's what one of the pipes looks like. They're anywhere from 8 to 33 feet in diameter, and their 109 miles were completed in 2006 and have a capacity of about 2.3 billion gallons of water. And you can see on the map, the red lines are where the pipes are. They parallel and mimic the Chicago River, the Des Plaines River, and some of the Calumet River, so that they're close to the system. When they have to dump into it, they can actually take that water in excess. This is all meant to prevent flooding events. This is a picture from, I believe, 2018, but I could have gone out and taken a picture just from last week. It was just as bad. All of this rainwater, stormwater, and the sewage funnels down to reservoirs. The Thornton Reservoir was opened in 2015. It had a capacity of 7.9 billion gallons. This year, they're turning over about 3 of that back over to the parks, and 4.8 billion gallons is going to be able to be held at the Thornton Reservoir. McCook Phase 1 opened in 2017, 3.5 billion gallons, with another 6.5 billion gallons being scheduled to open in 2029. So the system is not done yet. Technically, advocate for it being done. This is a great thing, and we'll all be much safer when it is. If we look at TARP storage capacity, here are the tunnels at about 2 billion gallons, 2.3 billion gallons of capacity. The Thornton Reservoir and McCook Phase 1 actually jumped our capacity up to about 11 billion gallons total, and Phase 2 will be about 17.9, I believe it is, by the time that's all done. Something that Friends has been doing in parallel with the TARP construction is a program called Overflow Action Days. If you're interested, Overflow Action is a program to alert you when there is an overflow or a combined sewer overflow, and it's a program to tell you how to manage stormwater better so that it doesn't get into the river in the first place. If we can slow some of that stormwater down by putting in rain barrels or other green infrastructure, permeable surfaces to allow it to soak into the ground, we'll stop it from getting into the river, and that will alleviate some of the problems with the combined sewer overflows and actually increase water quality. If you're interested in signing the pledge and receiving notifications, the link is there at the bottom. It's chicagoriver.org/overflow-pledge. All right, turning the page to another issue. This is the creation of the EPA in 1970. Before 1970, we did have a lot of polluters, industrial polluters, that could put kind of whatever they wanted into the water systems of the United States. Silent Spring comes to mind by Rachel Carson, the use of pesticides that would kill plants and birds and things like that. She's talking about birds disappearing. Take just a second. Oh, thank you, Christopher. If you want to know more about TARP, you can actually check out the MWRD site. A lot of stuff, the information that I'm sharing with you is coming from the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. And Chris is right. Everybody should go to their site and find out what's going on. And he even put the link up there, mwrd.org. Thank you very much, Christopher. So this is called point source pollution. If you have a source that is an outflow and it's coming from a specific industry or place on the map, it's a point source pollution. And this can include chromium, insecticides, detergent, mercury, lead is another one that's in the news lately because of Flint, Michigan. And these are very caustic, very dangerous chemicals. In 1970, the United States created the Environmental Protection Agency, and one of their jobs later in 1972 was to oversee the Clean Water Act, which was passed. And this it gives a budget to point source pollution, right? Industries and places that are producing this have only so much that they can put in. Hopefully it's actually zero, but the point source pollutions are reduced. And so that, I want to mention it, but it's not really that much of a problem today in the big picture. There are people who flaunt the law and actually try to supersede this, but it doesn't happen very much. The bigger problem today is non-point source pollution. And these are things that are not coming from any one specific source. They come from the community, from all of us, and they include such things as antifreeze and motor oil and fertilizer from farms, and battery acid and road salt and detergents and water and window cleaners and things like that. Road salt is a perfect example of this. I don't think anybody would argue that road salt isn't a good thing. It does save lives, but it also is degrading to water quality and the environment. For example, if there's a family that lives in this house downstream of a farm and the farmer uses an excess of fertilizer on the fields, wants to grow all of his crops nice and big, those can get into the water system and actually pollute their drinking water, especially if they're using well water. So it's just kind of an example of non-point source pollution. Nobody's really trying to hurt anybody else, but it does happen. The major components of fertilizer are nitrates and phosphates. There are other things, potash and whatnot, but the nitrates and phosphates, they help plants grow. They are like vitamins and minerals for plants, and they are found in fertilizer. And they help plants grow on land, but when they get into the water, they also help plants grow, sometimes in excess. And so you can see the high nutrient levels on the right there, a lot of duckweed and algae growing from the excess fertilizer. And rivers start to look very green. And because all the algae dies at the same time, generally, that decomposition will suck a lot of the oxygen out of the system, and larger animals like fish and crustaceans can actually die. That is called cultural eutrophication. Eutrophication is one of the reasons we have what's called the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. It's largely due to nitrogen phosphorus from the Midland America, all the agricultural industry of the plain states. That goes right on down the watershed to the Mississippi and down to the Gulf of Mexico. And that decomposition, again, sucks a lot of the dissolved oxygen right out of the system down there. And the thing I want to point out here is that in terms of nitrogen and phosphorus or phosphate, the states that contribute the most are in the dark red or maroon, and nitrogen is Iowa, Illinois, Indiana. Phosphorus is Missouri and Illinois. And so if you look at the only state that is in both lists, it's Illinois. So we contribute a lot to what is known as the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, those red areas where there's no oxygen. Turning our attention to trash, again, I said we're going to be bouncing around quite a bit today. Trash in our rivers harms plants and animals and people. It actually can alter dissolved oxygen levels and light levels in rivers and oceans. And once it's in the water, it's hard to get out. Plastic and other trash can actually hold a lot of dangerous chemicals and affect animals' ability to eat, move around, and also affect their reproductive capacity, so it's hard to have offspring. Trash also affects fishing, threatens health and safety, reduces tourism, and limits economic opportunities. Plastics specifically can really harm people, plants, and animals. Plastics float in the water, so they're very mobile. Plastics break down and have a lot of caustic chemicals in them. They can accumulate in river sediments and be there for just decades and hundreds of years. Plastics are unknowingly consumed by smaller organisms when they pass them up the food chain. They bioaccumulate, and they contain many toxic chemicals. And if you don't think plastics affect you, if you eat as a human, you probably are consuming some of these chemicals from smaller organisms when they consume them. Plastic is a problem. If you look at 100% of all the plastics since they were produced, about 30% become constant use plastics. Things like the old plastic gas can at the gas station. They never throw it away, they never replace it, they never reuse it, or they never get rid of it. And so it's there and it's never going to go anywhere. About 70% of plastics are what we call single use. They may be used once and then thrown away. This would be your water bottles and utensils and plates and things like that. Of that 70%, about 10% of it, or 6% of the total, is recycled. And about 90% of that, it just gets thrown away or incinerated. So there are a lot of plastics. I think we're talking about 8.3 billion metric tons of plastic. A lot of that, about 56 to 60% of all plastics, are just thrown away. That amounts to about 60% of the whole thing. They're discarded, but not all of it makes it into a landfill. Some of it ends up in rivers and just out in the environment. And so if you want to help this issue out, you can actually check out hashtag LitterFree Chicago River or hashtag Lose the Litter. There are all kinds of resources we have for organizing work days and getting out there and picking up trash. Last year at River Day, a year ago, we picked up trash at over 60 different sites along the Chicago River. And 6 different sites, we gave the trash bags to Waste Management, and they did an analysis of what we had picked up. And this is what it came back. It came back as almost 50% styrofoam and about a total of 25% plastic. And so all of the stuff that we picked up, almost 75% of it was plastic and styrofoam. And so this is a big problem in the Chicago River. I think it's important to actually know what's out there before you can actually clean it up. Since then, we've been doing community trash pickups, what we call our litter task force. And that data has been handed over to Friends of the Chicago River. And you can see the distribution of some of the trash that's in those work days. About 30% plastic, 25% metal, styrofoam, glass, cigarettes, rubber, ceramic is a big component. And I think this differs from the Chicago River Day only because if we picked up on a large metal object on Chicago River Day, it probably didn't make it into the bag that went to Waste Management for analysis. So I tend to go with this distribution of what's in the river a little bit more than what the Waste Management analysis said. But still, a lot of this is a big problem. And if we're ever going to get rid of plastic and other trash in the Chicago River, we obviously have to get out there, have volunteers clean it up. And if we do so and we have successful community engagement, we can actually turn the river into a very beautiful place. Plastic is a problem and trash is a problem, but it is solvable if we all work together. Another program that Friends did and still does is Think Beyond the Banks. This is a way of getting rid of caustic chemicals that sometimes you buy at the store and they work their way down the drain. You'd be surprised what you can clean at your house with just lemon juice, vinegar, and baking soda and things like that. So you can make your own household cleaners, window cleaners from a lot of common items. There's borax, vinegar, salt, lemon juice, baking soda, orange peels, things like that to make them smell nice. Making your own oven cleaners and drain cleaners, toilet bowl cleaners. Different stain removers. So this is a way of helping the river from a distance, things you can do at home to actually help the river. And this book is actually available on Friends of the Chicago River's website. And I should mention that it's printing, and the whole program itself is supported by the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. So it's a good partnership. We're all interested in cleaning up the Chicago River and making it much, much safer. Another thing that I just want to mention in one slide, because it's a problem in the river, is disposal of medicines. Medicines are chemicals, and things like birth control pills can affect fish populations and frog populations. And so just as a message, we should never actually flush these down the toilet or put them down the drain. There are hospitals and medical centers that will actually take unused medication off your hand. Never flush them. Another resource, no drugs down the drain. The website, you can check that out. Salt is another special case for pollution in the Chicago River. I'll mention that we're working on alkalinity requirements and standards for the Chicago River and the waterways, but there really aren't any quite yet. I mentioned salt earlier is a very useful thing. It actually does get rid of ice and snow, and but it can really degrade water quality when it gets into the river as well. And you really don't want more than a couple hundred parts per million of salt in the river to sustain aquatic life. Because freshwater animals, saltwater animals have evolved with saltwater and they're fine with it. But freshwater animals, like our fish here, they have to take in that salt component, and they're really not used to it. Their body doesn't know what to do with it, and it has a hard time getting rid of the salt once it's in their system, and so it can over saturate their tissues and their organs and actually cause organ failure. There's a slide from the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District with chloride levels in the winter months in the Chicago River. And you can see if we just put a line at the 150 parts per million or milligrams per liter line, a lot of our wastewater treatment plants actually exceed that chloride level in the winter months. So not to blame anybody, but it is a problem. Last thing, I didn't know where else to put this, so I just put it here at the end. Household hazardous waste. If you have things like batteries, drain cleaners, oven cleaners, pesticides, pool chemicals, ammonia, aerosols, pharmaceuticals, paints, especially lead paint, you should never put those in the sink or down the drain or out in the road so that they make their way into our local water systems. There are household hazardous waste collection centers. City of Chicago has an entire website for it. You can search cityofchicago.org and find out where to get rid of these household hazardous wastes, because they should never end up in the water. I'm just going to wrap up today with just a few slides from the climate change presentation, which I'm going to do again in August. Climate change is real. That is Friends of the Chicago River's viewpoint. And a couple of things that climate change is going to do and impact on our area is we're going to have hotter and wetter winters. And that is going to create more flooding, more erosion, stream runoff, invasive pests, and saturated soils. And the effects on humans are going to be increased property damage, repair and recovery from flooding is going to be lengthened and exacerbated. You might see beach closings, increased vector and waterborne diseases, more mosquitoes and things like that. And crop loss and decreased soil fertility is another thing that you can see. The other side of it is, instead of just a hotter and wetter winter, we're also going to see hotter and drier summers from climate change. And that can create things like frequent drought, decreased soil moisture, less aquatic habitat, loss of groundwater, lower river and lake levels, and increased combined sewer overflows, which we talked about earlier, and non-point source pollution. All these things go together. And in humans, they can actually create crop vulnerability, foodstuffs can disappear, water conflicts because of less water, declining native species, loss of biodiversity, and we have to implement infrastructure changes, kind of like TARP, but on smaller scales, just to deal with the hotter and wetter winters and the hotter and drier summers. So if I were to sum up climate change in one slide, this would be it. Again, seeing lower river levels, especially in the summer, there would be drought and less aquatic habitat. But every once in a while, we would have increased severe flooding, kind of like we had this last week. And that has an influx of bacteria and non-point source pollution into our waterways. And in terms of ecosystems, the worst thing would be native species declining and non-native species increasing. So a loss of biodiversity. And I promised the last slide. Again, I said we're going to cover quite a bit today. If we implement programs that clean the Chicago River and increase water quality, it has been proven. Actually, Friends did a study a couple of years ago, and it culminated in a document called Our Liquid Asset. And it said that if we invest in a clean Chicago River, we could increase construction revenue by $7.9 billion, create 52,400 construction jobs, $93 million investment in parks and forest preserves. We could see a decrease of 2.3 billion gallons of sewage in our river. And probably the most important, overall, every dollar invested in a clean Chicago River actually has a return on investment of $1.70 in return. So for every dollar you put into the system, you get $1.70 back. So it makes good economic sense to have a clean Chicago River and a increased water quality. I want to thank everybody for listening today. This has been Mark Hauser with Friends of the Chicago River. Much more information at chicagoriver.org. And just to kind of parrot what Christopher Haight said, if you want more information about a lot of this, go to mwrd.org. You can also see us on Facebook and at Twitter.